How do you manage anger in the moment? It's a great question because anger has the power to become incredibly destructive. Anger has the power to spiral literally out of control. Today we're going to examine 12 ways to help us manage anger in the moment and move away from some destructive behaviors which are not helpful when it comes to building our leadership. If you want to see anger, just go to any airport, find someone that's rushing towards a gate, stop them and ask them a question, and what you will see is anger. Why? Because one of the universal triggers for anger is getting in the way of someone's goal. You know, anger of all the emotions has the potential to spiral out of control, and therefore it's essential that we as leaders and managers are able to have tools to help us manage anger in the moment. Today, I'm going to present to you 12 tools that you can integrate into your life, into your leadership, that will help you manage some of that anger in the moment. The first tool is to remember that anger is not always bad. You know, I always refrain from calling emotions negative and positive. I think it's much healthier to say that emotions can be destructive and they can be constructive. And at times we wonder, how can anger be constructive and yet we can have a righteous anger? Think about all the justice movements of people fighting for equality, people fighting for their rights. A lot of that is based on the emotion of anger, which has moved them to respond to injustice to fight for justice. So therefore, anger can be constructive. Today, with the other 11 tools, I want to show you how to avoid and manage anger which has the potential of being destructive, which can damage relationships, which of course we want to avoid. Point number 2 is to know what anger looks like. You see, anger is one of the 7 universal emotions. And so we know when we see this muscle movement in the face that signifies anger, no matter where we see it in the world, that we can be sure that that's what the person is feeling in that moment. And what anger looks like in the face is when the eyebrows come down and are together, and the eyelids are tightened, both upper and lower, and then the margin of the lips are curled in. This is the look of focus, the look of attention that anger gives. And so when someone looks at you with that muscle configuration, with the eyebrows down, with the eyelids tightened, and the margins of the lips in, we know that they've been triggered and that they're feeling anger. The third is know what our anger triggers are. You know, each of us have a trigger print. Our triggers are unique. And so therefore what makes us angry may be unique as well. So the third point is know the triggers that make you angry. And if you're going into a situation where you anticipate perhaps that trigger is going to be activated, then bring with you as well some tools in the moment that you can manage your anger. Because if we anticipate being triggered, we're also anticipating what we might do in that moment. Learn your triggers, anticipate the triggers, and it will help you manage your anger in the moment. When anger is triggered, one of the first things that happen is that our body signals to us through its impulses that that emotion has been activated before even at times that we become conscious that we are angry. And so some of the anger impulses include a tensing off the muscles, a heating up in the body, almost like a pressure cooker. Sometimes our heart begins to beat faster. If we can learn what our anger signals and impulses are, we can get ahead of the curve and recognize that our anger has been triggered and then introduce some choice through our early awareness that can help us rather introduce behaviors which de-escalate and help us manage our anger in the moment rather than being reactive and turning to behaviors that we later regret. Number 5 is the power of our breath. Why is breath so important? Well, breath is so important because it takes us away from our fight or flight scenario. You know, anger is about fighting, it's about moving in, it's about responding to a threat. And that works up that fight or flight scenario within our body, and it activates the sympathetic nervous system. Breathing begins to help us switch from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic and introduces some calmness. So when we become aware of the impulses, when we become aware that anger has been activated, it's good to turn to breath and to breathe gently and to turn to some breathing exercise so that we can interrupt the anger emotion and to calm it down rather than escalate. Number 6 is taking that breath we've just talked about and introducing it into a technique such as the 7-second reset, which I developed. Basically, it's 7 seconds to help us interrupt a trigger. Second, number 1 is feeling our feet on the ground, feeling the physicality of our feet, which gets us away from some of the emotionality of what's going on in our brain. Seconds 2, 3, and 4 is breathing in and becoming aware of the impulses in our body, and perhaps in this case, how our body has become tense and hot because of the anger. Seconds 5, 6, and 7 is breathing out and releasing some of that tension, and also resetting ourselves and responding with some other choices apart from escalating the anger that we feel. Number 7 is reappraising what's happening. This can be a wonderful technique. It's basically putting yourself in another person's shoes, thinking of other things it could be, rather than us assuming that we know. So let me give you an example. Stephen Covey mentions a wonderful one in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about a situation of being in New York one Sunday morning. He's in the subway, it's quiet, it's wonderful. And all of a sudden, a gentleman enters with a few of his kids. And all of a sudden, his kids start being disruptive, making noise. And Covey can feel the anger rising within him. And so he decides to go to the gentleman. And he says to him, "You know, your kids are being very disruptive and it's making me angry." And the gentleman looks at him and he says, "You know, you're probably right, but I don't know what they're thinking at this moment. You see, we've just left the hospital where their mother just passed away." And all of a sudden, there was a reappraisal happening, and now Covey still saw these children making noise, but saw them in a different light. All of a sudden, that a noise which annoyed him evoked within him sympathy and compassion. We can try this every day. You know, I live in Washington, D.C. We have some of the worst traffic. And so I get an opportunity to reappraise my anger each and every time that I drive. When a car cuts in front of me, I can grip the steering wheel in anger. And then what I try and do is, you know, maybe they're rushing home for something. Maybe they've just got a bonus. Maybe something's happened at home that they need to be there for. Maybe they're rushing to something. And all of a sudden, I'm able to reappraise this situation, and it moves me away from my anger. So reappraisal can really help us deal with anger in the moment. Number 8 is realize that sometimes our anger is so intense that it is not possible in the moment to lessen it. And so the best solution is to say, time out, to walk away, and to realize that we need time to cool down. But the important thing here is that we also need to re-engage. It's not time I cool down and never deal with the situation again. It's time out, cool down, and then come back to have the conversation when calmer minds have taken the stage. Number 9 is be curious. You know what's interesting? It's almost impossible to be curious and angry at the same time. Think about it. How it is when we're curious, we're asking more, we're stepping in, we want to know more about it. Whereas with anger, all we're looking for is data that fulfills everything that we feel at the moment. So try and be curious. If a person in front of you is angry with you or they're making you angry, instead of you feeling those words hitting you, imagine those words coming out of their mouth and landing on the table and looking at the table and just being curious. Asking some questions. I wonder why they're feeling the way they do. I wonder why their anger is so intense. I wonder why I'm feeling the way I do. Why have I been triggered? That curiosity gets us out of the heat of the anger in the moment. You know, sometimes our anger goes on a long time, and sometimes it's not resolved. And so one of the ways of dealing with it is to write a letter, to put it down in paper, because sometimes we find ourselves not able to say what we really want to say because we're so caught up in the emotion of our anger. And so just write it out, pour out your heart, put it down there, put down everything, all the ugliness in a letter. Not that you're going to send it, but just to surface it so that you're able to look exactly what's in your heart, why you're feeling the way you do, and then to be curious about that and to look at some of the triggers and why this person or this situation has triggered you so strongly. Number 11 is, at times you might want to practice the conversation. You know, sometimes we are put into situations where we know we have to have this incredibly important conversation. We know that it might turn to anger. And so at times in our head, we think, well, I should say this, and I should say that, or I should say this. But there's nothing like having a practice of that conversation. I know in some of the coaching sessions that I did when I was working with clients who were about to approach a really deep conversation where anger may be part of that conversation, we would just practice it. I would say, okay, I'll be the other person, you be yourself, and let's just have a conversation. Now, you may say, oh, that's really artificial, but it's amazing, so it is, how quickly we get into our roles and how quickly we get emotional about that conversation. So if you have something important coming up, try and find someone to practice that conversation with. Number 12 is to keep a diary of regrettable, angry situations. You know, we all have flown off the handle. We've all have said things we regret. We're human. We've all let anger get out of control. But the important thing is when it happens, to make sure that we're writing notes about what happened. What were the proximate triggers that got her going? What did I feel in my body? How did I react? What did I say? What didn't I say? The more we're able to take apart and analyze those regrettable, angry situations, the better prepared we are the next time that something happens to manage anger in the moment. You know, anger can be an incredibly intense emotion, and at times we can feel that anger is controlling us rather than us managing our anger. But it doesn't have to be that way. So hopefully the 12 tips that I've shared with you today can help you truly manage anger in the moment. And if you're wondering about triggers and how you might be able to explore triggers and manage those triggers, then you really need to watch this next video, which talks about 5 steps to managing your emotional triggers.